The deck was alive with the chatter of Marines, their voices rising and falling like the waves below. She felt their eyes on her, heavy and curious. She moved slowly, adjusting her gloves and checking the gun as though it were an old friend. The wind tugged at her uniform, but she did not flinch. The metal under her hands was cold and hard, yet familiar somehow. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the ship rocking beneath her feet. She had spent months preparing for this moment, training drills in the heat and the cold, running through every scenario in her mind over and over, and now it was time to see if all of it mattered. She glanced at the colonel standing at the railing, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He was the kind of man who commanded silence with a glance, who could make fear crawl into the bones of seasoned Marines. She felt a flicker of nervousness, but she did not let it show. She had been in situations before where hesitation meant disaster, and she knew that this was one of those moments. The other Marines whispered among themselves, one leaning close to another to make a joke, another shaking his head at the thought of her handling the deck gun. They underestimated her completely, and she let them underestimate her. It would make the outcome sweeter. She tightened her grip on the gun and adjusted her stance, shifting her weight just slightly to balance the sway of the deck. She could feel the pull of the ship beneath her boots, the gentle roll of the waves, and the occasional sharp jolt as it cut through the water. She focused on the mechanics of the weapon, the alignment, the pressure, the leverage. Each part in her mind was a piece of a puzzle she had solved 1,000 times in training. The Marine who had made the joke stepped back, grinning, expecting her to falter, expecting to hear laughter and ridicule, but her face remained calm. She tilted her head slightly, studying the horizon, looking at the distant outline of a buoy floating lazily on the surface. It seemed almost peaceful from here, but she knew the danger of underestimating the power she was about to unleash. She imagined the projectile flying through the air, the roar of the gun shaking her chest, the splash in the water, and the stunned silence that would follow. She allowed herself a small breath and then let it go, focusing entirely on the work at hand. Around her, the ship moved unpredictably, dipping and rising with the rhythm of the sea. The metal beneath her boots groaned as the vessel strained against the waves. She felt the motion in her body, in every muscle from her calves to her shoulders. Her arms bent slightly, keeping tension in them, ready to absorb the recoil of the weapon. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, but she brushed it aside, not wanting distraction. She could feel the weight of expectation and the weight of doubt, and she embraced both of them, using them to sharpen her senses, to focus her mind. She could hear the chatter of the crew fading into a dull murmur as her concentration tunneled onto the gun, onto the target, onto the motion of the ship, and the calculation in her head of the trajectory she would need to hit the mark. A few Marines tried to give advice, calling out numbers and angles as if shouting at her could replace experience. She ignored them, each voice another wave against which she braced herself. She remembered training with the older men at the base drills that lasted hours, endless repetition of safety checks and calculations. She remembered the sweat running down her back, the sting of sand in her eyes, the call of the instructor telling her to adjust her grip or her aim. And she could feel it all now, feeding into her confidence, into the rhythm of her movements. The colonel had moved closer, still watching silently, his eyes scanning every motion, every twitch of muscle. She could feel his judgment weighing on her, and she did not flinch. She had faced authority before, had faced expectation, and she had learned how to remain steady under scrutiny. She adjusted her shoulder, slightly checked the sightline again, breathed in the scent of salt and oil, and felt her fingers tighten around the controls. The deck gun was no longer just a piece of metal. It was an extension of her body, every joint and lever responding to her will. She could feel the tension in the weapon and in herself, ready to release all at once. Behind her, the waves lapped against the hull, carrying the sound of distant gulls and the occasional shout from the crew. The sun reflected off the water, blinding in places. She squinted just enough to see the target clearly. She imagined herself guiding the projectile with precision. She imagined the shock of the impact, the surprise. Of those who doubted her, and she felt a thrill she did not resist her. Breathing slowed, she began to move with deliberate care, sliding her hands along the controls, testing the pressure, testing the response. She imagined the gun as an instrument of power, as a test of skill, as proof of everything she had learned in the months of training. She had spent every day preparing for moments like this. She could feel the weight of that preparation in her bones, in her hands, in the set of her jaw. She could feel the anticipation building, not as fear, but as a steady focus, a calm, ready to be unleashed. The ship dipped suddenly, and she shifted with it, her body moving in perfect sync with the unpredictable rhythm of the deck below her. She could hear the quiet snickers of the crew fading into awe. In her mind, she pictured herself handling the gun with the ease of someone who had been born to do it, not with arrogance, but with the certainty that came from knowing skill well practiced. She traced the lines of the gun with her eyes, memorizing the angles, the levers, the weight distribution. She could feel herself becoming one with the towers, seemed to compress into moments as she prepared. She felt the tug of the sea, the subtle shake of the deck, the cool wind biting her skin, the smell of salt and oil and metal and adrenaline, all coalescing into a single point of focus. She was ready. She would show them all. That strength came in forms unexpected, that precision could be found in calm determination, and that underestimation was a dangerous mistake. She was a Marine, now fully aware of what was required of her, fully prepared to take command of the moment, fully ready to act when the time came. She stepped closer to the gun, adjusted the final controls, her eyes never leaving the target, her hands steady, as if guided by instinct and training. She could feel the energy in her muscles, the readiness in her mind, the anticipation in the crew around her. She could sense the quiet shifting in their demeanor, the sudden awareness that something extraordinary was about to happen. She felt the weight of expectation and turned it into power for herself, into clarity for her actions, into a moment that would define her. Standing on that decant, in that stillness before action, she felt something else, a quiet thrill, not of arrogance, not of pride, but of knowing that she could meet any challenge. She could command the tools before her, and that nothing could shake her focus, nothing could sway her resolve. She was ready, and she would not falter, and when she took the next step, it would be decisive and undeniable. She took a deep breath, feeling the deck sway beneath her boots, the wind whipping around her face, her hands gripping the controls of the gun. She could feel the weight of the metal in her arms and the tension running through the mechanism. The ship rocked, and she adjusted her stance to match the rhythm, her eyes never leaving the target, floating in the distance, a small buoy bobbing gently, as if mocking the enormity of the moment. The crew around her held their breath. The whispers stopped, the laughter ceased, even the waves seemed to pause in anticipation of what was about to happen. The colonel watched, his eyes narrowing at first in skepticism, then widening in disbelief as he saw the precision in her movements, the way she adjusted her shoulders, the way she tested the levers, the way she calculated angles with instinct and training fused together. Like a living machine, he could not have expected this calm determination from someone so new, yet everything about her was perfect, controlled, disciplined, unflinching. She moved like someone who had lived her entire life preparing for this single act, yet to anyone else it would seem effortless. She adjusted the elevation, checking the alignment, testing the recoil, imagining how it would respond, imagining the arc of the projectile slicing through the air. She heard the soft creak of the metal beneath her boots, the subtle groan of the ship as it strained against the waves, and she factored each movement into her calculations. Every sway, every tilt, every gust of wind, every shadow of the sun reflecting on the water became part of the equation. She could feel the ocean itself becoming part of her awareness, a living entity against which she measured herself, against which she tested her skill. The Marines around her began to shift nervously, their earlier jokes fading into uncertain murmurs. They had not expected her to act with such authority, not expected her to command the moment. As if the gun itself recognized her dominance, she could feel their surprise, and she used it to steady herself to sharpen her focus. She imagined the shot as a bridge between training and reality, between expectation and action, between doubt and undeniable skill. The trigger felt smooth under her fingers. She tested the weight of it, felt the tension building as the spring compressed, and she held herself perfectly still, waiting for the precise moment. When everything aligned, she imagined the projectile moving through the air, cutting the distance between her and the buoy, imagining the splash, the shock, the reaction of the crew. She could feel anticipation coiling through her body, not as fear, but as a source of energy, a steady, focused energy that she could channel into the action to come. The colonel stepped closer, leaning slightly over the railing, his eyes fixed on her. He could see the intensity in her face, the calm readiness in her posture. He felt a moment of recognition that this was not luck or chance or bravado, but skill honed to perfection. She was the embodiment of discipline and training, a reminder of everything he expected from a Marine, and somehow, more than he had anticipated, he realized that this moment would be remembered not for the humor of a joke, but for the demonstration of ability and courage. He could feel the shift in the energy of the deck, the crew waiting in stunned silence for the inevitable. She inhaled slowly, her mind entirely focused on the mechanics, the trajectory, the timing, the balance. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, steady and strong. She could feel the tension in the gun in her shoulders, in her arms. She could feel the connection between herself and the weapon, and between herself and the target. She visualized the arc, visualized the impact, visualized the silence that would follow as the waves swallowed the sound of the projectile making contact. She allowed herself no hesitation, no doubt, only the certainty of preparation and experience. The first motion of the gun was deliberate, precise, a smooth lift of the barrel aligning with the distant buoy. She adjusted the sightline, checking again the wind, the sway, the angle, the distance, and she felt the culmination of months of training compress into that single act. Every early morning, every drill, every correction, every instruction leading to this precise coordination. She could feel the power of the mechanism, as if it were a living extension of her own body, ready to respond to the smallest nuance of her command. Around her, the crew watched with wide eyes, some frozen in disbelief, others leaning forward instinctively, as if their own bodies wanted to anticipate the shot. She could feel the attention like a tangible weight pressing against her, but she transformed it into focus. She let it sharpen her senses, heighten her awareness, steady her hands, and calm her mind. She imagined the buoy in perfect clarity, the gentle roll of the water beneath it, the way the sun glinted off the surface, the distance measured precisely in her mind as a formula she knew she could execute flawlessly. Her key tightened on the trigger muscles, coiling, ready to release the energy held in the spring. She felt the recoil as a potential she could control. The roar before it came, a vibration building through the metal, through her arms, through her chest, the ship beneath her responding to the inevitable power she had harnessed, the moment stretching into eternity. A tense quiet before the storm. She could see the colonel leaning forward, slightly emotion, frozen in shock, anticipation, and the other Marines bracing for something remarkably. Then she released it, the mechanism roaring to life with controlled violence, the recoil jolting her slightly, but she absorbed it perfectly. The projectile launched into the air, a blur of speed and precision slicing through the space between the gun and the buoy. The sound rolling across the deck, across the water, a thunderous affirmation of skill and training. The buoy shattered into fragments, spraying water and splinters into the air, and for a heartbeat, there was silence as everyone processed what had just occurred. The colonel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, eyes wide, the crew around him staggered by the demonstration. The woman stepped down from the gun, her movements calm, measured, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She walked past the crew down the deck, her uniform damp from the spray, her boots heavy on the steel, her expression serene, not seeking praise, not seeking recognition, only carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone who knows what they are capable of. She felt the subtle shifts in the energy around her, the awe, the surprise, the respect building. Silently, without words, she knew she had changed the perception of those who had doubted. She had proven skill over assumption, discipline over expectation, and calm over chaos. Colonel finally moved his hand to his face, brushing it slightly. As if to wake himself from disbelief, he took a step forward and nodded slowly, his mind racing through the implications, through the reminder that every Marine, regardless of size, gender, or previous reputation, could command power and precision if they possessed the courage and discipline to prepare and act. She had become an example, a warning, and a revelation. All in one moment, her calm had turned into thunder, her focus into undeniable action, and she had done it without a single word, without a single boast. The crew began to whisper again, not with jokes or disbelief, but with new respect. Some shook their heads in amazement, others exchanged glances of recognition that they had underestimated her, and that their laughter had been misplaced. The buoy floated no more, only a ripple of water and a cloud of mist remaining as proof of her success. She walked steadily down the deck, her gaze forward, never faltering, carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done exactly what needed to be done. She returned to her position among the crew, quietly standing at attention, but no longer the rookie, no longer the subject of jokes. The energy of the deck had shifted, the dynamics had changed, and she could feel it in the way the colonel watched her now with a mixture of pride and disbelief. The other Marines looking at her differently, no one spoke, yet the silence was full of understanding that the joke had been answered in a way that none of them would forget. The precision, skill, and calm she had displayed had turned the laughter into admiration and the casual moment into a defining story that would echo in the memory of the ship for years to come. And as the ship continued to rock gently on the waves, as the sun reflected off the water, she stood quietly, waiting for the next order, her mind clear, her body steady, her heart calm, knowing that she had proven something not only to them but to herself, that preparation, discipline, courage, and focus could turn even a moment of ridicule into a display of undeniable power and mastery, and that the true measure of a Marine was revealed not in jokes or expectation, but in action and the willingness to rise to the moment.